Regular listeners know how I work with guests on this podcast. I do the Spodek method, which is my technique to lead people through evoking, through support and non-judgment, their intrinsic motivations around the environment and leading them to act on those, not telling them what to do, giving them facts and numbers and instruction. It works very well, and I've been leading workshops in it. The person I speak to in this episode is Evelyn Wallace. She took the first workshop and she didn't know what she was getting into. She contacted me actually for leadership coaching. It happened to be when I was announcing the first workshop, and she joined it. And she was very nervous when she joined it because she felt like she didn't really know much about sustainability. She felt like everyone else knew more than her, and she really loved the experience. I think everyone in that group loved the experience. So she became the TA for the 2 sessions that followed, and she's going to become the instructor for the future workshops coming up. I've developed a great relationship with everyone who's taken the workshop, in particular with her, that we have these conversations that are, I would say, for me, fun, but also because of the support and non-judgment, and because we are sharing what we've been going through, they're intimate, and we talk about things that are really great. And to me, this is what happens when you share environmental things or your actions with the environment. We decided, because we felt the conversations were so enjoyable, that it would be useful for people to see what it's like after you've taken serious steps to live more sustainably. Because I think most people view it from the outside as deprivation and sacrifice and loss of something that they want. Whereas our experience has been liberation and freedom and fun, intimacy, and more connection. So we decided that we're going to have video. Well, what we're planning for in the future is to make video conversations where people live streamed, so that people can come on and ask us questions and things like that, something like a radio call-in show. We haven't yet gotten everything set up, and so we decided we're just going to do what we can at the beginning. So we recorded a couple video ones, and I'm going to put the link to those first 2 video conversations. This one, I don't know, Zoom did something weird, and so there's no video, there's just audio, and I decided I'll post it to the blog. People there can listen to this conversation, hear what it's like for people who are seriously acting on sustainability and loving it and sharing it with each other. And it's a long conversation, but I hope it's engaging and fun. I'll put the link in the notes to the first video conversations. And hopefully at some point in the future, I'll put in a link when we have the live stuff going on, so you can join the conversation, ask us questions, challenge us, just join in and listen. Anyway, so here's me and Evelyn Wallace in an impromptu conversation. You'll hear that we talk about, here's what we talk about. She did a workshop which followed on from the actions, because it's project-based learning in these workshops. And she's doing these cooking workshops with this local chef who teaches in a culinary class school. Then I talk about a workshop that I did, my 3rd annual Bronx cooking workshop. We talk about intimate things about relationships with family, how things change, what we learn about each other. We talk about leadership techniques and style. So enjoy this conversation. I hope you like it. And I hope you also get to see that the other side of the challenges of acting more sustainably, of looking inside oneself and saying, wait, why did I think that this thing that pollutes was so benign, and what can I replace it with? Here's me and Evelyn. Welcome everyone to me and to Josh Spodek and Evelyn Wallace talking about sustainability things. And you were just saying something before we recorded, but we're going to jump right into it. You held an event last week, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, in which you were leading a group on sustainability. I have to put this in context for people who aren't aware of this, that less than a year ago, when we first met, and I suggested you do this workshop, you said, I'm not an expert. I don't know that stuff. And then when we started it, people who are no more expert than you were like, some of them knew a bit, but you were like, I'm catching up. I'm not an expert. How can I help others? Mm-hmm. And now, all right, so I asked you how it went, and you wrote back something like with several exclamation points, all caps. Can you give us some context as to, all right, I'll give some context as to what led you to there. So you contacted me, you did the workshop in the spring to learn the Spodek method.
Last year.
Over the summer, you TA'd then you became the TA for 2 different sections, including professionals who work on sustainability. And now there's a project with each of these things that you worked on a project. So some of it was making food, Some of it was making videos. And um, last I heard, you knew a chef in your area who teaches culinary arts of some sort. You were invited to give a talk, a demonstration on sustainability in food. Take it away.
Okay, great. Yeah, I do. I mean, just to sort of color in some of the blanks of the past tense, I definitely came to this like um thinking I was reaching out to you about leadership. I was like, great, this guy knows some stuff. I'm a graduate worker in social work, sorry, grad student in social work. And then the sustainability thing was sort of like a surprise, like, oh, I guess I can, sure, I'll make that work. I definitely felt like the black sheep. And what helped me and what might help our listeners out there is that there is no wrong place to start. There is no behind. Wherever you are now, you can do something differently by tomorrow if you want, when you want, when you choose you want. And that was game changing to me, that it's not about the y-intercept, it's about the slope. So yes,
Wait,
I
explain that. Explain that. That was too quick. I knew that, but
okay.
they didn't.
Okay. Well, yeah, this was like a tangent, so I'm trying to like not go too far off of tangents, but sure, yeah, let's do it.
If you're going to
So
talk geometry and then use the word tangent, I mean trigonometry and then use the word tangent, you're
it's
on.
poetic. Right.
Let's not run around in circles here.
As far as haha, I see what you're
I
doing.
think it's a
Well done,
sign.
scientist. Um, Dr. Spodek.
What does it
Um,
mean, the y-intercept and the slope and not the y-intercept?
well, yeah, so I during our workshop, when I was a participant, I remember I wasn't it was nice to be encouraged to ask all the questions. Like I didn't feel like I was withholding like how I really felt. And so there was a lot of I felt like I was giving a lot of pushback about like all of it, especially the Spodek method, like I don't get it. What's this all about? And I think there was this moment where you helped me understand that wherever you're starting is fine. Like wherever you're starting is fine. Whatever you're doing right now, not that our behaviors are all fine, but like there is no missing the boat. So it's not so like your y-intercept is in a totally different place. The point on the graph, if you were to graph it out of like sustainable behaviors and life habits, your point on the graph was totally different, way like off the charts of where mine would have been. And so when I put myself on a graph next to you, I felt like, well, what's the point? Like, I'm never going to be him. So like, why try? And it was really helpful for me to be encouraged where I was for you and like your group and your like leadership style to meet me where I was, to say that it's not you're on, I was on my own graph, and that, okay, so here's where I'm starting. Here's the point at which I'm starting. Here's my behaviors. What are some things? And what like the things that I thought to change came out of the Spodek method game. It wasn't like it wasn't you guys telling me what to do or what to change. So the first sort of element is being open to being willing to change, being open to like looking at what you're doing. And although that's not how you get there, that's not how the Spodek method motivates. But yeah, I guess it was a relief to me. There was like a relief to know that I haven't failed. I haven't missed the boat just because I'm not Josh.
Now I'm going to fill in
Um,
something else on where the y-intercept came in,
okay.
because part of it is to influence other people, but it's to influence people. The Spodek method is to influence people based on their intrinsic motivations, not extrinsic. And so, but you kept saying, well, if I'm trying to get them to change, aren't I pushing them? Aren't I trying to change them? And I kept saying it's not. There's a big difference between extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation.
Mhm.
And I kept trying to say it's not. What I eventually said that made sense was it's not the absolute level where they are. It's the y-intercept. Are we getting them to change? So if
It's
we
not
get
the
them to
y-intercept.
change,
It's the angle of
right?
slope.
But so when you're leading people through extrinsic motivation or trying to coerce or cajole or convince them,
Mm,
you may get compliance. You may get them to shift once, maybe
right,
twice,
right,
but they're not intrinsically wanting to move.
right.
Whereas if you don't move them at all, but you get them to enjoy, to expect that it's going to be joy, freedom, liberation, fun, then not only will they change, also that's going to change, they're going to want to change others because you want to share fun. I don't know everyone who's like, oh, I did this thing that was really annoying. Why don't you do it too? I did this thing that's really freedom giving, made me connect more with my community that people want to share. And I kept saying all these non-scientific ways and non-mathematical ways, and it never hit. And I was like, I don't care about the y-intercept. I care about the slope. And you're like, that's it. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I get
Of
it
course, I
now.
also care about the second derivative because then you can get acceleration.
Right.
But
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah, and that yeah, the movement. It's movement. It's
yeah,
constant. It's not a one and done. It's not meatless Mondays. So shall we shift into
yes, back to you
the
and your
presentation?
event.
Okay, so yes, I do have a friend. He's like relatively local. He lives up in Washington. It's yeah, it's not right around the corner, but he is a teacher of culinary arts at a trade at a high school, a trade school, or what do you call it?
I think of it like a when artists go to conservatory style schools. So I don't know if it's
Right.
conservatory style, but it sounds like that.
Yeah, it's like where kids actually have fun and like they get to cook all day, all morning. They have 3 hour there's a 3 hour session in the morning and then different kids come in for the afternoon session and they get English, math, and science credits, which is how English, math, and science should be taught interactively and with engagement and motivation. Anyway, the kids love it. Like the class has gotten rave reviews, like both from the administration and from the kids. I've seen it with my own eyes, like kids approaching him in the street saying, "I love your class. I'm shifting my life around so I can take it again." So I knew that I was walking in to a group of somewhat receptive audience, even though they're high school kids and they're also kind of trapped. Also, I haven't been a high school kid for a while, so there was the culture
And
gap
presumably a high bar. If he's doing
of
really well and
engagement.
you come in, like they're going to compare you to him, and they love
Right.
him.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and the fact that I was even approached in the first place, the fact that he said, "Oh, I like part of what I am supposed to do as the leader of this class is to bring in other guest speakers and you know how to cook this sustainable food. Like, I'm going to bill you as a sustainability expert." I was like, okay. At first, I wanted to fight him or disagree. At first, I wanted to disagree and demur. And then I realized, no, like, sure, I do know stuff. I have learned stuff. I do know stuff I can teach because it's been taught to me. Also, I've done my own experimentation and done my own learning. So it was really like a perfect blend of um, yeah, group learning and also individual learning. And I'm thrilled to share it. Also, I felt competent enough because I had worked with this particular food, not recipe, it's more like a formula.
Mhm.
We've talked about it before. You call your, I mean, I think of it as like your food, like, oh, this is Josh's food, but not possessive, but that you sort of invented or taught us. And so, and you call it your,
Well, I call it famous no packaging, vegan, no solar powered stew.
right. And I always thought, okay, that's really accurate and awesome, and you're right, but like we really probably need to work on branding. So my first, when I first like hosted a dinner party. Well, I first sort of learned how to cook it myself and realized, oh, this is way too wet, or I need more salt, or all of the iterations of mistakes. I hosted a dinner party just for my friends, and it was so uplifting and nurturing, like not just physically but spiritually, to be together and break bread. And literally, I bought bread, no packaging, from a local
Mhm.
bakery, added it to what
And
I eventually called vegan mash, and you're like, well, that's gross too.
yeah, I don't like mash.
So I'm now calling it, and what I called it in this class was veggie hash without the trash.
And I bet that when you had your friends for dinner, I know that when I bring friends over here, I can feed 5 people for less than I would pay for myself at a restaurant. There's
Bingo.
no noise. There's no one trying to rush me out. There's no like how to figure out the tip. There's no. It's more comfortable. We can spend time. But before I knew how to cook and cook really quickly, like they come over and I cook while they're there. That's
Mhm.
part of it.
Right.
And I
Yeah,
love.
the demo was part of it. When I had the dinner party,
Mm.
some friends were sort of chatting in the back. I was like, quiet in the back. Like, this is beans to water ratio is important. They're like, oh, I didn't know this is a demo. I was like, how did you not know? I said it in the text. But yeah, it's one of the selling points of this amazing food is that
This lifestyle.
lifestyle. Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, but this particular manifestation of the lifestyle, the eating
Mm.
part, that it is dirt cheap to buy this food, and
Yeah.
so it really obliterates that myth of like this is too expensive. Then you start thinking, who told me that? Who told me it was too expensive? Was it the McDonald's mindset? Like, was it like our general overall dominant
Well, I,
culture that wants it, that like profits off of us thinking that we can't afford to eat anything other than drive through.
I think part of it is that a lot of people think, what am I supposed to do? And because there's this demand, entrepreneurs come in and like they sell stuff. So they won't, you don't have to buy anything new for this to live sustainably. In fact, buy less.
Buy
But
less.
if you don't think about it and you just like, well, the market tells me I'm supposed to buy, like I have silverware, but apparently now I'm supposed to buy bamboo silverware too. All right, if that's your idea of sustainability is buying things that are marketed to as green, that's probably going to be pretty expensive.
Right.
But the other thing is, I think, all right, I just did my cooking workshop up in the Bronx,
Oh,
and
nice.
in the
And
Bronx
that's recently?
in this community garden, and they're doing all the stuff that people. What?
Another one? Like recently?
It was originally last weekend, but I just did it 2 days ago.
Oh,
It
cool.
was
Okay.
it was postponed for rain, one
Oh,
week,
that's right.
and people down here lecture at me. You don't know what it's like in the Bronx because they can't do this because they don't have what you have. And luckily, no one told them because they're doing what people down here say they can't do.
Right.
And I think, I try to empathize with people. Why do people say that? Like, why do people say, like, I'm living more sustainably? And then people say, but someone up there can't.
Hmm.
What does that have to do with anything?
And
I
yeah,
think,
who did they
I
ask
think
you to speak up for them? Yeah.
I think what happens in their minds, and this isn't everyone, but I think a lot of them, they think to themselves, I should be living more sustainably because I know that I'm hurting people. So I'm a good person, but I'm doing something I think is bad. How do I reconcile that? And then they think, well, they can't do it.
Mhm.
I'm in solidarity with them. Until they can do it, I can't. Like I would be privileged and doing something they can't. Never mind that the people who want to stop polluting are the ones who are polluting the most, who are the rich people, not the poor people. I don't know
That's
what.
the
No one,
thing.
no one says Bill Gates can't do that.
Mhm.
Bill Gates can't stop flying around in private jets. So you should fly. It's totally self-serving, specious, fatuous. How can I sleep better at night? They're not consciously thinking that, and it's not
And
everyone.
before we lose our listeners, if they identify as the people who are saying, but what about, I feel like it's important to know that we like we live the way we're taught to live. And until we're ready to acknowledge that it's not working, like until we're ready, because I know people live with a deep sense of angst. They tell me,
Mhm.
they express it. I know that there is this sense of like things aren't quite working, like things are on fire, things are expensive, like too expensive. And I think so much of human behavior is unconscious. It's what we have been, it's what we were taught like when we were, basically growing up, like when we were in being programmed, when we were little robots being programmed. And then we live the programming that was put into our system, into our operating system. So I'm not a computer scientist. I don't know if you could tell that. But I feel like it takes there is something in chemistry, right? It's like startup energy. Like it takes more energy to get it started than it does to keep it going, right?
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
uh, and then if you can get a catalyst, you can not have to go over the reaction potential.
Catalyst. So you are a catalyst for me. And I think being a graduate student in social work, not quite a social worker yet, but I was positioned to do a lot of self-reflection, to do that hard work of looking in the mirror and thinking, "Eesh, like I don't it's not like I don't I'm not I don't hate myself, but like, oof, there's like some things there that I don't like."
Mhm.
And instead of I think the most common reaction to that, like when someone holds a mirror up to your own behaviors, which is what you're doing when you're saying, "Oh, I'm teaching a like a," or no, sorry, you weren't telling people that you were teaching a thing in the Bronx. It's just people's reaction to you somehow out of nowhere is, "Oh, but they lecture you about people in the Bronx can't afford it."
Mhm.
So and therefore, and so I think for them that what you're doing is somehow holding a mirror up to them, whether it's like conscious or not. They're seeing it as a mirror, whether it's conscious or not. And instead of acknowledging if they don't like what they see, they throw shit at the mirror and they find
There-
ways to
There's a
um
whole chapter in my book,
great. I believe it.
Psychology of Corruption.
Right. And so like I try to operate, like I try to stay anchored to that um compassionate place where I mean, I know you like to say that Meatless Mondays are sort of like sober driving
Corrosive.
Saturdays. Like, feel
Mhm.
free to drive drunk the rest of the time because, hey, at least we're getting better. And like, okay, well, that behavior is harmful and it's actually not like it's not okay to do ever. I think when we have been when a system has separated us from the harm that our behaviors cause, and when we have grown up being told from the people we trust, from the systems we trust, that this is the way to do it, it takes a lot of work, like inner work, to ignore to overcome that, to switch positions. And so, and but I'm also newer at it. Like I haven't had like the repeated conversations that you've had, I'm sure, over the last 10, however many years you've been having the same conversations. I would imagine I'll reach a point where I'm like, whew, tapping out. Like I can't deal with another, like, oh, fission will save it person.
Uh-huh.
um, uh, and I guess I didn't know to expect, and I do want to get to the like food
Yeah. Let's
event
jump
at some
there.
point, but I
So
didn't
yeah.
know to expect that so many of my liberal friends, like I'm in most of my network is people who identify as liberal. I've done a lot of work to try to like cross bridges into communities that identify differently, and like because I feel like that's an important part is, and I know you've done that too. I it's kind of wild getting to the moment where where you realize that we've all been living, not we, like we as a group, as or like when I sort of identified as liberal or like part of that grouping, that
Mhm.
like there's this
Tribe.
cloak. Right, there's this cloak of safety of like, oh well, we're environmentalists and we, it's like these labels, but there's no action to back it up. It's like saying
Well,
I'm blonde.
it's action consistent with, they want to show that they care, because caring is a very, among many things, it's not the only thing,
Mm,
but liberals, caring is a very high value. So they want to show
mm,
I care. So if they show
interesting.
compassion to the people suffering, that's lovely. Like if there's an abused child,
Mhm.
it's important to show care and help the child, but you got to stop the abuse. The
You
child
gotta
is
stop the
not
abuse.
causing the abuse.
You gotta stop the abuse. This is where I feel like I'm eager to just to get this MSW and then to go off in the world and do what I know I need to be doing with some letters behind my name, but not necessarily like in line with what social work teaches, because we're training like every, I mean, I think about how many people, how many graduates, how many new social workers are there just this year who have been taught based on these um, curriculums that we all have, like the approved, competencies that we have to learn. I feel like social work is one of the only disciplines that really does push toward social justice. It says social justice in its sort of tenets. It's like underlying philosophy, and yet there's all these false assumptions, like how do we best help the abused child? Let's how do we how do we get a little more funding for this nonprofit that's going to help abused children in this way? But no one's asking, how do we stop the abuse?
Mhm. Yeah,
that
and
that's where I feel like
more than that, if I start working with abusers to try
mm,
to help them stop
mm,
abusing, they're like,
mhm.
"But look at the children! Look at the children! Look at the children!" I'm like, "That's what? What do you think I'm
That's
doing
why
this
what I'm
for?
doing, right?
Do you think the child is causing? No. How? Back to you and
Thanks, Josh.
before you did it, were you went through this process of being scared to do it and gradually realized you built yourself up, or how did you go through the emotional change from um, anxiety to confidence? If that's
Sure.
Were you
Yeah, that's a
confident
good
walking in, or were you anxious walking in?
that's a good question. I think that I overcame that initial anxiety pretty quickly because I had enough data to support like this anxiety is just a reflex. This is just what we do. This is what our nervous systems do when they're like approached with new things. This is a growth edge. But rationally, and because I had this like beautiful new sustainability community that continues to meet on Sunday
Mhm.
mornings when I remember that it's Sunday. Sometimes I forget. But
Sometimes it is.
I came to you guys to say I have this thing. Like, who does anyone have any advice? Like, what should I do? Is this like okay? Okay. And so having the support and like validation from my team was really
Mhm.
helpful.
And role
Um,
modeling from Emily
right, exactly. Yeah,
and me
exactly. And
too.
it's funny when I talked to her. So another member of our cohort, Emily, had like jumped into hosting these veggie hash without the trash dinners. She didn't call it that. Um, and
Well, it's not just about the food. It's It's a Spodek method training workshop,
Right, right.
activating people on sustainability.
No, right. Did it sound like I was saying that was the whole
It's
thing?
not just food.
It's not just food.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I turned my phone off. She had done, yeah, some of these dinners, and it's funny because when I talked to her later, she was like, "Oh wow, like I really I need to get my act together. Like I need to really step up." Or she was like, "Oh, I tend to have like a more cavalier approach. Like maybe I should do more planning." I was like, "Oh, what? Oh, interesting. Like now, am I like I'm motivating you
Mhm.
to jump to even further action? Like great, we can just be links in a chain with like no hierarchy. It can be this like continual leapfrogging. Like, all right, well done. Everybody wins. Um, so yeah, I had role models, I had like social support, and I had like my own repertoire built up of like experience. I wasn't going in never having cooked this pot of food. I had gone in cooking for myself for a while, cooking for other people. Um, and yeah, when I was a little late to the class session, so the kids were like a little antsy, but I jumped right in. They start in a classroom, and then there's like the whole kitchen. It's like a huge professional kitchen. I've worked in restaurants, and like I've never seen such a big kitchen. It's awesome. It's like it's made to accommodate 30 people, 30
Mhm.
chefs, which is great. But in the classroom, there's like the high school posture,
Uh-huh.
a lot of slouching, and like I kept him waiting, so that was my bad. Um, but I started with engagement, like, hey, how how's everyone feeling about the future? Hey guys, any what's your sense? And it was interesting because like as a grown up person who was trying to connect with teenage people, there were like groups of kids who you could tell were like the talkers, or the like the we're not paying attention, but we're gonna have our own conversation based on what you're saying, so we're kind of paying attention. And I found a way to engage them. um I had asked people like what their favorite foods are, or like what they think about healthy food, like
Oh,
and I
interesting.
got so I got them. They said all the answers. It's too expensive, it takes too much time, and it's yucky. I was like,
Uh-huh.
great, I'm glad that you think all that. Let's go in the kitchen so we can disprove all of those things. And there were it was interesting because when there's so many kids, it's like there's a lot going on in the kitchen. And I do have to say, I was hosting or co-facilitating a community event that I had organized later in the day, and I had hired my friend chef to cater it. And one of the one of the privileges of being the person in charge is that, and being friends with the cook, is that, or the person cooking the food, don't call a chef a cook, is that we could work together to make that food as trash free as possible. So it was really beautiful to have like these like a multiplicity of opportunities to share this kind of nourishment. And yes, sustainability is not just about food, but human eating is one of the big ones.
Mhm.
um, so like while the kids who were extra engaged were sort of circled around like the table that I was at, like chopping the veggies and showing them the ratios, there were other kids helping chop up the veggies and make the beans for the food we were going to eat later in the day. So that was cool. Everyone was involved in a different way. Um, but it was really fascinating. Like I showed them that one little quarter cup of beans, like if you have a quarter cup of beans and a quarter cup of rice dry, and then I taught them the ratios of the water to that. Um, I was like, you can do the math of like this times six if you want, but like just so you understand, like if you're cooking this for just yourself and someone else, a quarter cup of each of the legumes and the grains makes 2 plates of food with the veggies and the water and all of that. But like that was something I had to learn because I was cooking too much food, and I recently unplugged my fridge. Thank you, Josh.
Wow.
Because like,
Wow.
wow, I guess I should eat the food sooner instead of like 2 weeks later. It's kind of gross.
Mhm. Yes.
My food is fresher
One
than your food. Not you, you generally.
In one instance, your fridge will keep something fresh, but refrigerators in general lead to less fresh. The
Right,
systemic effect is opposite the
right,
one-time effect.
right.
One flight will bring you to someone far away.
Mhm.
Flying in general leads you to have people that you love being to live flying distance away from someone you love.
Right, right, right.
Building one
Um,
road will alleviate traffic in the short term, but in the long term, it'll create more traffic.
right.
These, yeah. So sorry, I couldn't help.
No, yeah,
So
good. Thank you. Thank you.
you unplugged your
So
fridge. So cool to hear.
It was awesome, and we had gone to the farmers market early, like earlier in the weekend, so the food we were bringing in was fresh and trash free. And I don't know if the kids like really tasted that particular flavor, but it was cool to like to hold up a bundle of carrots and be like, "This is $4." Like the scoop, like this whole bag of beans was $4, and I'm taking one tiny scoop, so we can like kind of round down to zero. Like you have some change in your pocket, that's how much these beans were. And they got to choose which. I did only bring, you had suggested that I find another pressure cooker. I wasn't able to get one. So we ended up making 2 rounds of food, but it was cool to let them choose. Like I brought a variety of grains and a
Oh
variety of
man. Yeah.
legumes. So they, there was some agency on their end and they could experiment with things that they were like, what is that? I was like, I think it's barley. I don't remember. It was like in a big by the pound thing. Like try buying something that you don't eat, it'll be good, I promise. And then like watching it cook, watching the kids like chop up the garlic and then watch what happens to the food when it's in the pressure cooker pressurized, and then like when and why we add stuff later.
Mm.
I think I had brought some kale, that's right, and just chopped it up real fine because I think for the for the children, it's easier. It just goes down easier if there's not a lot of like chewing the greens. And what was really beautiful is like by the end of the first pot of food, I had explained like we had made what was the equivalent of 6 plates, but because there's 30 kids, we just made a bunch of little tasting dishes, and it
Mm.
was fast. It was like so rewarding to just watch them disappear, like watch them get gobbled up.
Mm.
Oh, and I forgot one of my secret ingredients. I use this as a Josh trick. I know that you like to add raisins or like a little something sweet after the
For
pressure.
them. Yeah.
For them. Yeah, for them. Yeah, I never do that for me.
Well,
I'm way
it's too
above
sweet
that.
for me. It's
Yeah, not me. And for all you listeners out there, it's okay if you still want to add raisins to your dinner.
yeah, when someone's over, I put in a lot more like carrot or sweet
Salt.
potato or
Mhm.
squash
Good.
or pumpkin, if you can see that pumpkin over there.
Yep. Know your
And
audience.
um yeah, but when it's me, see for me, I like to eat fruit in my dessert.
Hmm.
So I put in less of like carrots in the stew and eat more apples and pears
Hmm.
afterward.
Num num.
And so raisins are just like it's raisins I use for making I put them in when I make vinegar with the apples
Nice.
because they're
Yeah,
really
you know a lot
sugary.
of like advanced tricks. Like hot sauce and
Oh
like
yeah.
fermenting cabbage and stuff. I'll get there. I'm just not there yet. And I didn't have any raisins, so I brought these dried cherries that I actually was picking when I had
Oh
met the
man.
chef. It was
Uh-huh.
it was like so beautiful that like these cherries that yeah, they're 2 months old, right? But they're 2 months old from my hand. There's nothing, it's just cherries that like got the wet out of it
Yeah,
and
because
live in a jar.
a lot of dried cherries in the bulk food sections are sweetened with sugar
Mm.
and cranberries too. It's like they're fruit.
They're fruit. They already have their sugar.
Don't bring
But
sand to the
if
beach.
you're, yeah, but like corporate production of food leads to having to pick them in times that, yeah. I mean, we all know this, but it was
Well,
really,
even the health food stores.
oh, interesting. I asked my health food store if they're ever going to have like dried fruit in bulk, and they're like, no, we need to be sanitary. I was like, all right, I'll drive across the border to Winco or whatever.
So
Um,
this food is disappearing into their little mouths.
and the adults in the room who like I had realized like, oh god, I need to like introduce myself. I'd come in running like, sorry, I'm late, guys. New town, I don't know where I am. um they had a million questions. Like it was cool to watch the adults come like, okay, so how do you like asking questions and like, oh, can you add this, or when would you put this in, or how much for this much. And even a woman asked me, is there cheese in this? And I was like,
Oh,
no,
did you have
there's
nutritional yeast?
yeah, of course.
There you go.
There's
Yeah.
nutritional yeast because as a vegetarian, I now count on it for my B12.
Mhm.
And like you said, it kind of feels like there's something missing when you don't have it. It's like that it adds a flavor that's yeah, integral to the like wholeness of the hash. Um Also, I live in Oregon, so a lot of people ask, "Is there weed in here?" It's like,
Mhm.
"Not yet, but that's a great idea." Maybe we can have the adult version of the spiked dinner. But ultimately, like it was a big success. I remembered at the end, like, oh yeah, you can put like nuts on top, and they had some nuts that they had already roasted there, like as a class, so they chopped them up
Uh-huh.
and put some on top, and like started. You could see them starting to see um the possibilities, because it's just so different. I also showed everybody a picture of one of the foods that I had made a particularly gorgeous. I think I showed it on. I
Yeah,
think I
yeah, with
showed.
the cherry
Yeah,
tomatoes on top. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Because it's just so beautiful. And so when people like, it's one thing to hear the words, that's just like cognitive recognition, but when your eyes see it and then when your mouth tastes it,
And
you understand like,
smell.
oh,
Yeah.
this really is delicious. This really is delicious. And I actually okay, so the group of kids who were like the little chatterers, like the not listeners, they came back and they're like, it was really good. Be even better with meat. Like, all right, well, go hunt an elk and throw some
Mhm.
ground chuck in there. Like, you do you. But it was cool that even they were engaged. You know what I mean? Even if they had like a little, dig or addition, I mean, a culinary suggestion, it was cool to see that even they had tried it.
Mhm.
Um, and oh, okay. So I've been meaning to ask you, I've been wanting to follow up with you. This sweet young woman came up after her and said, she said she was diabetic, she was type 1 diabetic. She's really been working to she's a pescatarian.
Mhm.
Um, she doesn't eat meat but does eat fish. I didn't want to suggest Seaspiracy to her quite yet because let's take one step at a time. But she asked about like protein that would be safe for her because she knew that legumes also had a lot of carbohydrates. I was like, well, I know quinoa is like a high protein grain. There might be other grains like that, but I'll check with my people to see if they have any like specific ideas or interventions for type 1 diabetes. So I'm asking you now if you know anything or if you know any.
Yeah, the
um
source I would look for is nutritionfacts.org, Dr. Michael Greger, who's been a
oh,
guest, and
okay.
also Dr. Joel Furman, Eat to Live. And they're both very into, they both came to the same diet that I did, but they came to it through health and
Right.
science of
Mhm.
nutrition science. And I came to it through sustainability.
Sustainability.
Uh,
Wow,
so
cool.
um, How Not to Diet, I think would be the book to look at from Dr. Michael Greger, and Eat to Live by Dr. Joel Furman.
Okay.
And if you look up Greger's videos and just search, he's got thousands of little 3 to 5 minute videos. And if you just search on beans or legumes and protein, because he talks about that. Apparently, what I remember is that animal protein actually spikes insulin more than you'd think.
Right.
And beans, I think, really level out your beans and berries, I think, really level out your insulin levels. Or
Okay.
sorry, not the insulin levels, but the
Blood
blood
sugar.
sugar spike.
Cool. Okay. Great. I'll send those resources to the chef who can share them with the young lady.
And so what can you describe the emotions of the students? I mean, I think you're kind of hinting at it, but how would you describe their
Um,
emotions and also the chefs?
yeah, okay. I didn't really get like the chef was sort of out of my awareness. He just like gave me the mic and I was trying to juggle like 30 different sets of needs and try to engage, I was trying to call on kids. Um, I know later the chef was like, "Wow, good job. Like people spoke up today who I've never heard talk in class before." I was like, "Neat." That's what
Mhm.
happens when you ask someone directly a question. You don't give them a choice. Um, but I would say, well, one, that group of students was not a monolith, so it's not like they all felt one thing. I would say that there was some skepticism. There was also some like enthusiasm. There were definitely kids who from the beginning were really eager, like um to at least learn. And I think and this was based on your suggestion, I had mentioned to them like there are some like junk food items that I still struggle with not eating because they just speak to
What
the
junk
I
food?
don't know.
I've never heard this term. Oh, doof.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, yes, there is some doof that I still consume. And I think that was actually a bridge of like partnership building or, engagement. Like I think that telling them that like it's not I'm not immune from the culture that we all live in. So, you know, like a kid held up a bag of Flamin' Hot Cheetos when I was like, "What's everyone's favorite food? What do you like to eat?" He held up Flamin' Hot Cheetos. I was like, "Whew, yep, that's the one."
Uh,
I feel you. I feel you. Um, so I think they probably there was like some skepticism and then there was some trust building and then there was enthusiasm. Um, I think there was a lot of curiosity. Like
mhm.
there was a lot of like you could see sort of the wheels turning. I mean, these are kids whose parents still feed them more or less. And you could tell the kids who were more in tune with what their grocery bill or grocery system was. Some were like, I don't know, my mom does it and food just
Mhm.
shows up. and so I like my hope was that this plants the seed for the moment when they do feed themselves or when they are responsible. I know one of the things the chef does with the kids is teach them one dish to make on Thanksgiving so that like they really start. It's not like cooking isn't this thing that you just do later in life when you have to. It's, you can start now and you can participate in the, you don't have to wait for your mom to cook you all your food. So my hope is that some of the kids are inspired enough. I would say that by the end there was some sense of inspiration. No one really said that, but you could see it in their eyes and you could see it, when they were eating, like this sort of new awareness of what was possible. And the adults, like
Mhm.
there there are a lot of special needs kids in this class because it's a great place to actually learn stuff when like you're when sitting down and shutting up is not a great model for your
Mhm.
learning style. And so they are assigned like extra adults, for like one-on-one or one-on-two support. I think it's one-on-four. But so there were like 3 or 4 or 5, maybe even extra adults in the room, not just the chef. He has an assistant, but I don't think she kind of made herself scarce. I think there were maybe some people who, I don't know, like they heard sustainability and they went running, or at
Oh,
least there was one. But
wow.
the rest seemed um like they never said it, but it seemed like it was like an eye-opening experience for them. Like,
Mhm.
oh, this in a way that you wouldn't believe if you couldn't taste it. That you wouldn't
One
believe.
of my favorites, every now and then this happens. It's been a while since before the pandemic because I don't have people as over much. Also, since with the solar, well, now I got the second battery again. It came back, they fixed it.
Oh,
So I'm
nice.
drunk with power again. But when I was down to only half a kilowatt hour, I couldn't invite people over because if it was raining, then it wouldn't work. And I was like, I was having a lot of just, salads, which is fine for me, but it's not like exciting for others. Anyway, sometimes like they see everything that I put in it. They see every ingredient that goes into it. And more than once, someone would take a bite and go, that's really good. What's in it?
Right.
Because I think that they're seeing healthy, 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 healthy. And they're thinking, taste bad, taste bad, taste bad, taste bad, taste bad. And they taste it and they're like, this is really good.
Where's the
Something's
magic?
in here.
Yeah.
They saw everything that went in there.
Right.
And
What's the
that
magic ingredient?
mindset shift is just, yeah, that flavor. That's one of the things that was really beneficial, that worked out for me. Was for a long time I talked about sustainability being delicious
Yeah.
because that was my big experience, the big shift. And it's very visceral. I mean, there's a little more sensory
Mhm.
than, well, the taste and the smells and the touch. Everything. I mean, food is everything: smell,
Right.
taste, touch, hearing.
Mhm.
What did I leave out? Anyway, it's got all five senses. And yeah, when someone says, or that time when the conservative dude was over here, and it didn't even occur to me that when I said vegan anything, and he takes one bite, he goes, I can't even tell there's no meat in it.
Right.
I'm like, what? Oh,
Right.
yeah, right. I
Yeah,
didn't, you
vegan
were
is a word.
anticipating it to taste bad.
Yeah. People associate the word vegan with disgusting. And that okay, so the taco bar that I served at the community meeting later that day, the chef was like, "Do you want me to get some chicken?" And I was like, "No. No. Let's serve them the food that is nourishing and like let's not even give them that option." And yeah, there was more than one comment late that night where people said, "Oh, I never choose the vegan option, but this was actually really good."
Mhm.
Yeah, good. You're right.
The, there was some, now I'm going to put a little side here that I've seen this, you got to search for it online because it's not on YouTube, but there's this video called The Great Dance. I'm sure, did I tell you about it?
Mhm.
It's about the San, this hunter-gatherer culture hunting, and there's three different ways that they hunt. And what they're doing is very different. Is like, it's the opposite of factory farming.
Right,
And I'm vegan in this world. I don't know what I would do if I were living with them. I'm not going to live with them. So it's an abstract question. I have better things to think about.
right.
But there's a huge difference between eating meat in our culture and eating meat as they did, as our ancestors did for 250,000 years.
That's right. I live in Oregon. Everybody hunts. So I was like, I'll eat meat if the person who took the life of the thing is eating there with me.
Mhm.
Like that doesn't conflict with my moral ethic, or like that doesn't conflict with my values. You acknowledged that that the meat that we're eating was the ending of a life. It wasn't like this separate thing that came in a pack, plastic package.
Yeah, I'll be more direct that if I eat or pay for factory farming, whether you care about animals or not, that hurts people.
Go
Whether
on.
you care about people, it hurts animals. And it hurts, it lowers Earth's ability to sustain life.
Can you just say a little more about that? Because you and I both agree, but maybe for people listening, they're thinking, what? How does eating meat hurt people?
In factory farming,
Mhm.
one way is that the runoff from the factory farm, because I'm sure people have seen pictures of factory farms and it's like there's no plants around there. There's food shipped in, there's all this poop, and that poop is really it could be fertilizer, but it ends up in this country, mostly in the Mississippi River. So these rivers, that the Hudson River here, it used to be back 400 years ago, when the fish came up to spawn, they would create tidal waves because there's so many fish. And I mean, read J.B. McKinnon's Once and Future World, and he talks about how ships out in the ocean, sailboats before steam, they would get caught stuck in the middle of the ocean.
Whoa.
Because the fish were so dense that in the water that they were stuck there. I mean, so anyway, so this runoff goes in there and it causes algae to grow, which and it makes it in this weird situation where it sucks up all the makes it, what do they do? It creates so much oxygen that the things can't live, or sucks up the oxygen. So you get this big dead zone at the mouth of the Mississippi into the Gulf of Mexico where nothing can grow. Or if you go to other places, you get these algal blooms. But also,
But what if I don't live in those places, Josh?
well, you're lowering Earth's ability to sustain life. If it is the question, you don't care if others get hurt, but as long as you're okay yourself. I can't speak to that. The other thing is the fertilizer it takes to grow all the plants for them, because it takes 10 times more plants to grow animal. Yeah, like a pound of animal took 10 pounds of plants to make it. So you have to make a lot more plants. So that means you got to have artificial fertilizer, which that's coming from fossil fuels. It's the only way we can make artificial fertilizer. There's no hope on the horizon of any other way of doing it. Of course, so that leads to, it leads to all the effects of fossil fuels. So that's going to be people from the land that there's fossil fuels and minerals underneath it, kick them off. So that's imperialism, colonialism, slavery. You don't believe it? Look up Earth Rights, look up Unocal versus Doe versus Unocal, and follow on from that. And then you're going to have the pollution that comes out of that. You're going to have wars over these resources. So, and if you believe that somehow in the future, maybe we'll be able to make artificial fertilizer some other way, okay, in the future, start doing that. But right now, that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. So if in the future, we can have sustainable airplane fuel, which I highly doubt, that's not the plane that you're flying today.
Right.
The plane you're flying today uses jet fuel.
Right.
So it's okay.
How does jet fuel harmful?
If we have in the future, we can feed 10 trillion people on this planet and it's all sustainable. Great. I'm all for it. But the worst way to get there is to live unsustainably today. Mm-hmm. The best way to get there is to live sustainably today and then keep growing things, right. Keep developing things. And if it's possible, great. I'm all for it. I'm more for it than anybody else. If it's not possible, better we stop now. So then you can get into overshoot and collapse if you really want to get into some systems dynamics. But if you have, I'll tell a story about a friend of mine, Kevin, out in the West. So he bought a ranch in Idaho, I believe. He's retirement age, and he meets a hunter out there. And they're sitting there, and the hunter points out there's a bunch of elk off in the distance. And the hunter says, "How many elk do you see over there?" And Kevin says, "About 100. He goes, "Yeah. I've lived here a long time and I hunt, and there's enough food here for 75 elk over the winter." So Kevin goes, "I guess that means 25 of them are going to die over the winter." And the hunter says, "No, 25 are going to live." because the 100 of them don't get together and say, well, there's enough food for 75, so you 25 go die. They don't, they just all eat. So the next day, there's enough food. If there's enough food for 75 over the winter, but all 100 are eating it, then the next day there's enough for 74 over the winter. And they all 100 eat it. And the next day there's enough for 73 over the winter, and then 72. So they're all eating it faster than they can sustain themselves.
Metaphor for
because if
what
100 of them are eating, they're not rationing it out. They're all eating their share, so that by the end of the winter, when the spring is about to come, the 25 who make it are barely making it. Now, a lot of people will listen to this and say, okay, there's another effect too, which is the elk. Okay, a big effect is that when the spring comes, the plants will regrow. But if we depend on a non-renewable resource and it doesn't regrow,
right,
we could drop down by 3/4 as they do. But we're way over. We're not like 100 when it's 75. We're like 8 billion when it's 3 billion. So it's like,
will you remind me
2.5 times over. Hold on, I got to keep going now.
Sorry.
The
Population. Sorry.
There's also a wide variety of stuff going on there. There's a lot of different animals. Take when you make, I don't know if you've ever tried to make wine. You put grapes and let them ferment. You let the yeast turn the sugar into alcohol. Well, the alcohol is poison for the yeast. So you may know that you can't get alcohol content above like 15%, somewhere around there. Now you can distill it to higher amounts, and that'll get to higher, but that will kill everything in it. You can use alcohol as a disinfectant. It kills things. So it's more like yeast, where we're living in our own waste, which the elk don't have to deal with. So if you put more and more sugar, the higher content wines tend to be sweeter because you have to put more sugar in, but after a certain point, you can put in all the sugar, that is to say energy, you won't get any more alcohol out because the yeast can't live in their own poop anymore, their own waste. Now, I'll throw in one more thing, is that our waste is not just our poop, but we have waste that never existed before in nature, which is plastic, radioactive stuff, carcinogens, all these exotic poisons that don't break down.
Right.
So, and some people might say, well, we're smarter than elk. We can solve these things. Well, we're smarter in some ways and not smarter in others, because elk they don't draw lines on maps and say, if you cross this, I will defend myself. And they don't have machine guns and bombs that we have thousands of years of history of showing that we kill each other for these things at much higher rates that the elk don't.
Right.
Now, it could be that we solve some things, but one of the big solutions is don't put the population above what the environment can sustain. That message has been out there. It does work. We know it works, but there's a large part of the population that will not accept it.
What works? Population control? Keeping
the population below. All right. Most indigenous cultures say they know, well, the ones that have been around for thousands to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, they know don't go above a certain amount.
Right.
So that we know that works. It's worked for hundreds of thousands of years. Now we have these traditions, these cultures born of agriculture, that it switched, and it really kicked an overdrive in 1492, when it was suddenly from the perspective of the Europeans, which is to say Europeans were indigenous to the Middle Easterners, right? The empires came up, the Hittites and all them, then Greece, then Rome. So the Europeans were indigenous at one point and they got assimilated. We are assimilated too, if we're living unsustainably, which is to say, if anyone out there is like, Europeans did this, well, you're one of them. You're part of that culture unless you're living sustainably. In any case, from the perspective of those in 1492 who found these two new continents, they saw infinite territory. It was basically infinite from their perspective. So they adopted a culture of, well, there's infinite resources. More land means more energy, because it's arable land, I should say. Well, actually, for that, most people don't distinguish between arable and unarable land. But if it's arable land, that means plants can grow, and that's solar powered energy. So we have abandoned principles that worked for hundreds of thousands of years. They actually, it looks like most of them also they also had these crashes on the scale of dozens of people or hundreds of people.
Hmm.
and worked into their culture guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
Don't eat the last fruit. Don't kill the last animal.
Right.
Always leave something for nature. Now, you'd have to ask them how this implements because I'm not there.
Right.
But my understanding, and also if someone tries to become the dominant, tries to dominate the group, ridicule them. And
Well, groups of other men would like get together. I mean, sorry, I don't have like specific examples, but I read about this in Tribe by Sebastian Younger, which you recommended, about like the one of those guardrails is that like if one guy started taking all the stuff, like more than he could eat or more than his fair share, other groups, usually of men, would stop him.
Mhm. Yeah, it's men, women. I mean, in the serious hunter gatherer in like James Sussman's stuff in the San Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert, and there's many other immediate return hunter gatherer communities. There's no dominance between men, women, even gerontocracy. There's not patriarchy. There's not a gerontocracy,
Hmm.
and no one knows for sure. But the anthropologists seem to say that that is the closest replica of what close representation or of how most of our ancestors lived.
I am learning a lot at this point in my social work studies about polyvagal theory and about our nervous system. The evolution of our nervous system started as, before we could move, before we were human. Like the part of our brain that's pre-human is dorsal vagal, which is one part of our parasympathetic, which is basically freeze. It's the like freeze response to survival. Like you can't move. The next thing that was developed was our sympathetic response. That's like once we have bodies and we can move and like run away, fight or flight. The most evolved component of our nervous system, it's the second part of our parasympathetic nervous system. It's called ventral vagal, and that's the part that learned to co-regulate as a group. It's how we survived, like working together to catch big game, which is more than we could eat or survive solo. And so there's like a developmental evolutionary argument to the reality that, I don't know. Sorry, I guess I don't remember how like it was related to what you were saying, but yeah,
So I'm
basically
going to
like
talk
working
about
together.
my thing up in the Bronx on Sunday.
Oh yeah, great.
And let me see. Oh, it's not handy. I made some notes to. So it's my third annual cooking workshop up in the Bronx. Actually, third annual at Drew Gardens because there's one at this church community center the year before that. So maybe it's my fourth annual. In any
Cool.
case, in past years, it's been about the famous no packaging vegan solar powered stew, although it wasn't solar powered before. And this year, I decided to go for a bit more because so Drew Gardens is, by my estimation, one of the best, most beautiful spots in New York City,
Mhm.
and vying for Central Park. Now, Central Park has has size,
Mhm.
and it's got all this corporate support. But this is tiny, but I know the people who did it. Who actually, it turns out 30 years ago they cleared it out from being a junkyard. So it wasn't the people who were doing it now, but it's been going for 96, I think is when they started. And it's right along the Bronx River,
Mhm.
which is a freshwater river. And they have like, it was cold when I was there, but it's got the boating and like, but it's really just, and when I walk up to this place, there's iron gates around it and it's at a bus stop. And so I say to this guy, the gates are locked and the people are inside. So I got to wait for them to come out and get me. And so I'm talking to this guy who said, oh, they were just there. And I say, oh, I'm doing this cooking demo. I want to come in. So it's just some random guy who's waiting for the bus. And he comes in and he's waiting for the bus all the time. He's never been in there. And he's like, this is amazing. And it is amazing.
Wow. Cool.
And so it was Julio or Mario or that. Anyway, I'm the only one who only speaks English. Well, I got some French too. And first they give me the tour, and they're growing more and more and more. So the city and the state have given them friction. Someone wants to get promoted or who knows what. Like no one gets it because this is this really beautiful space, but politics are weird. But so the city wants to expand. At the far end of it is the Bronx Cross Bronx Expressway, and they want to make more they want a fruit forest.
Oh, cool.
In any case, they're showing me around, and there's a few people who came, not that many because it was postponed for rain from the week before. My mom was supposed to be there. My sister was trying to be there.
Oh.
And because I want to, so I said, all right, I'm going to talk about the food. I'm going to talk about how to make the stew. And I talk about the price, and I talk about also you don't need a fridge, because I had a sweet potato, a carrot. These things they're fine without refrigeration for months. Dry beans for years,
Right.
and I had some chard and some collard greens, but they had collard greens and kale. So I used their stuff
Like
that we
growing?
picked there. Yeah. And they're
Yes.
like, we don't
Fresh.
charge you for it. Fresh and in the middle of the Bronx.
Yes.
So I'm like, all right, let's use your stuff. Also some peppers, and what else do we, anyway, they got lots of stuff there. They got sage and mint and the cherry tomatoes, peppers, just growing there. And callaloo. They got,
How do you
they're
spell
just
Drew?
with corn. What?
How do you spell Drew Gardens? D-R-E-W?
Drew,
Okay.
like
E-W.
Andrew.
Right.
And so then I say, when I was a kid growing up, my parents helped organize a food,
Co-op.
a
Like a buyer's club with the co-op?
yeah, buyers club. And a neighbor, somehow they got in touch with a neighbor who had got it going, and it was 10 people or 10 families. And every 10 weeks, it was your turn at 4 a.m. to go down to South Philly to the distribution center. And that's all the way in South Philly. You in the Bronx, you got, what's it called? They have a huge distribution center right there. It'll come to me in a second. Hunters Point. And so everyone put in their orders on, I think, like Wednesdays, and then someone would go down at 4 a.m. on Thursdays. They'd get 10 families worth of a week's food for 10 families.
Mm-hmm.
So people who know engineers may have heard engineers often say, quality, time, price, pick two, you don't get three. Well, by going at 4 a.m., they get the earliest stuff, they get the best quality. Because they're buying in bulk, they get the lowest price. Because you only have to go down once every 10 weeks, it's less time. So you win on all three, plus you get community.
Right.
Now, it finally hit me that people kept telling me, possibly because I own my apartment in Greenwich Village, I got the Ivy League degrees, they're like, Josh, you don't know what it's like up there. You know what it's like for a single mom with 3 kids in a food desert. And it finally hit me that my parents weren't environmental. In fact, if you listen to my podcast episode with my mom, the podcast episode the Spodek method didn't work with her. And when you and I did the workshop in the spring, we were talking about sometimes it's difficult with family because of emotional things. And I thought, yeah, you're right. It is that emotional stuff. And it could be that. Also, my mom's idea of the environment is she grew up on a farm in South Dakota, and her idea of the environment is it's like 100 degrees out. They got no air conditioning. You step out, you open the screen door for a second, and you got mosquito bites all over the place. That's her idea of nature. Right. She has I've never heard from her a positive view of like, that's what I like. So she talked about how she misses the birds, but she does not want to return to no air conditioning and mosquitoes all over the place. Mm-hmm. And they did these things, like start the co-op. When we lived on Rockland Street, and I would go to the neighbors' houses, and they got the welfare peanut butter, because everyone on Rockland Street was on welfare. My mom was like, we weren't. So we were, at that time, the co-op was formed. So we were shopping in the co-op, and the peanut butter there is, you can either get peanuts is the only ingredient, or peanuts with a little salt is the only ingredient. Mm-hmm. And you have to stir it all up because it separates. Right. And the welfare peanut butter that the neighbors had, as well as the welfare cheese, I would just scoop it up because it was so sweetened. It was like candy. Mm-hmm. And, for most of my childhood, I loved going over to neighbors' houses because then we could get the sugar cereals. Mm-hmm. But the reason we loved when my parents would take us to McDonald's. That was like a rare treat, because here's why. Why was that a rare treat? Because we were living sustainably? No, we may have been living somewhat sustainably, but that was expensive. Fresh was cheaper. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a world where fresh food from the Buyers Club that's what you do when you don't have time, when you don't have money, and you have 3 kids to feed. Mm-hmm. And everyone who thinks that it's more expensive and takes more time, I'll put it in liberal terminology, they haven't had my lived experience. My lived experience is that it saves time, it saves money, it's more healthy, mm-hmm. It tastes better, But I didn't realize that when I was a kid. And when I was given the talk in Drew Gardens, and I was talking about what I can feel it coming up. When I was talking about what the co-op means to me now, and I didn't realize how much it meant to me then, I was getting choked up. And they were like, we can see. It's McDonald's, they're not doing anyone any favors. They're not saving anyone any time, any money.
Right.
But when you form, so not everyone knows what a co-op is. So a co-op
But
is, it's a store where everyone who shops there is an owner. And so there's not
no
like
profit incentive.
Jeff Bezos is pulling the money out
Right.
to him
And giving it to shareholders, keeping it.
Yeah, they're doing this favor to the shareholders. But a co-op, the motivation is, since whatever profits you get are just redistributed among everyone, and this is a contract. This is totally capitalist, or not. If you want to be communist, it's communist. If you want to be capitalist, it's capitalist. It's a contract signed where everyone has a mutual ownership of this thing. It's as capitalist as you can, if you want it to be capitalist.
It's a trade. It's an agreed trade. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the motivation is higher quality food, lower prices, more variety, or it's whatever the people want. I guess if you had a co-op and everyone wants Cocoa Puffs, you'll get Cocoa Puffs. But as it works out, people want what the Weaver's Way in Philadelphia. It was fresh produce from local places.
I have so many follow-up questions about your mom, although I know we've talked about it a lot. We've talked about moms a lot. We've talked about your mom. I don't know if we want to go there. Maybe it doesn't even have to be about your mom, but talking about this idea that some people's experience with nature or like the environment is just, it's bad, it's dangerous, it's uncomfortable, like keep it away from me. That feels like, I mean, I know it's true. I know your mom's not the only one who feels that way. Also, like nature and pets are some of the most universally regulating like external factors, like signals of safety for people to like help regulate their own systems. So like it's almost universal that, I mean, not quite, because there's some people who are like, no. But I guess my question is, are there so few of them that we can just acknowledge that that's who they are and how they are, and we can sort of move on and shift culture in a way that eventually they'll just be part of it, whether they like it or not? Or is there a way to address that like absence of a connection or a relationship with nature or the environment?
Well, I want to distinguish, there's a spectrum here, but I'm going to simplify and say there's one type of, I think that there's a lot of people who will tell you nature is not that big a deal to them, but that's what they're saying on the surface, because they imagine you live in a world in which there's a lot of pollution going on, and pollution brings you joy, or things that pollute bring you joy. Right. And you don't want to and you think you're a good person. I think most people believe they are good people. And then they recognize that what they're doing is hurting others. So maybe they like the air conditioner. Maybe they like to come home to a cool apartment and they don't want to wait 30 seconds or 5 minutes for the apartment to cool off. So they leave the air conditioner on when they're out. And they probably feel like, well, that is kind of polluting. My energy is coming from coal or whatever. And maybe they feel like I'm polluting other people's worlds, but I like this. So inside there's this internal conflict of, I like it, but it hurts people. I feel like I'm a good person, but I'm doing something I feel is bad. So this internal conflict is painful. It's difficult. It's easier to deny and suppress it than it is to face it. So if you deny and suppress it, then you keep doing, or to say it's good. A lot of people find ways to say that things that they do bad are actually good. It's actually helping the economy or something like that. Sure. So if I say to that person, tell me about a time in the environment that you really enjoyed, they might think, I'm hurting the environment. Like I've worked out how the environment is bad and we got to defeat the environment or something like that. A lot of people in Silicon Valley have that view of like, we have to defeat nature. There's this quote by the guy who started Google's health ventures, like nature is what we have to defeat, something like that. And
good luck with that.
So there's this internal conflict that gets resolved by squeezing nature out. So to get to them, they're going to feel very vulnerable when asked, does the environment mean something to you? And so they're going to say no, because they don't want to face this conflict. There'll be other mechanisms going on, but I think there's a lot of people who they're not going to tell you, they're not going to be open with themselves or anyone else about what the environment means to them. So with people like that, you have to be, oh yeah, I'll tell you, have to be for them to open up. But I realize this from learning how to be supportive and non-judgmental extra with them, because so many times I've done this and then it eventually comes out. Sometimes that first question, the Spodek method of, can you think of a time out in the environment that's something meaningful to you? And they'll talk about some nature show or something that's not their personal experience, or like they went to a theme park, or they saw something beautiful from an airplane. And that's not their experience of nature, but that's what they allow it to be about. Or they'll spend a lot of time talking about what they read in the paper about all these problems of deforestation and global warming and things like that. And that's not their experience of nature. That's their experience of reading about nature or reading about human effects. So I'm not sure how many people out there, nature means nothing to them. Because I've had plenty of people on the podcast who grew up in cities, and even growing up in like Brooklyn, where there wasn't access to a forest, there was still the park at the end of the block that meant something to them. So with my mom, I suspect that there's something in there. One of the things, when I talk about how this has made me closer to my family, a lot of it is realizing huge gaps in my relationships with my parents. My dad just died, so that's won't be able to patched up in a two-way direction. But in the case of my mom, it really dawned on me a little while ago. I was at she was in town, and a friend of hers was visiting from France, and the three of us were having a drink together. And so she was Celine, the one from France, was asking me about what I do, and so I said, I'll do the Spodek method with you. So my mom was sitting between us, because she knows both persons, so you'd think she'd be in between. She said, no, I'll go over there. So now I'm talking to Celine. Also, Celine's English isn't great. My French is like terrible. So, and it was a loud bar, so it was easier to be closer. But my mom just disengaged. My mom will butt into every conversation. But when we were doing the Spodek method, she was like, oh, you guys talk. So one of the things that Celine asked me was, what do you do if someone doesn't care? And I said, well, my definition of leadership is helping other people do what they already want to do, but haven't figured out how. So if the person really has nothing connecting, I can't lead them. I got nothing to do, so I got to go on to the next person.
Right.
And I also said how I've done something like 1,000 times by now, maybe more, maybe not, I'm not sure, but it's worked almost every time. And I didn't say it because my mom was there. My mom was one of the cases where it didn't happen. But it really hit me only after that conversation that I didn't have anything to work with my mom. She didn't share there was nothing about nature that she liked, that she told me that she liked. So the odds of me being super into sustainability leadership, the odds that my mom would be like one of the few people who doesn't care about nature, pretty low, I would think. I mean, she and my stepfather go camping, but he does it all. And I don't know if she's...
Is it like in an RV, or is it in a tent?
A pull. When I was a kid, they had we'd go camping and the kids would get tents, and they had this camper thing that unfolded that was towed behind. I think they still pull along a camper. And here's what really got me. You want to get like close with me and my mom. A little while ago, I was talking to her, and she said at the end of the call, she goes, bye-bye, I love you, even if sometimes I don't understand you.
Right.
And I think she said that before, but then it hit me. This is getting really personal here. It hit me. I don't think she's ever asked.
Yeah. To understand.
Yeah. And one thing I've noticed with her is that I believe that she sees people as that way. Like someone is that way, and that's the way it is.
That's it.
And you don't bring up differences, because exposing conflict in my mom's house growing up, I learned that if you expose the conflict, that's the problem.
Right.
If you just act like it's not there, no problem. If you bring it up, you're the problem. And it was a big deal for me, like business school, and I took classes in negotiation and learned conflict resolution, conflict management. And even my first boss, my first manager, the first time when I had a conflict with someone and that I worked with, and the manager said, all right, each of you share what the problem is and let's figure it out. And I go, to me, that was like, fight. I heard her say, you guys fight.
That's your
Because
sympathetic nervous
that's what I grew up learning, is like to say the conflict is to expose it. And she goes, and I said, wait, you want us to share it? And she goes, yeah. How else can we resolve it?
Right.
And I'm like, well,
first you have to name it.
Oh, I guess that is how to solve it. And I'd like, this would be 2005, 2006, 2004.
So you were a grown-up person.
No, 2004, 2003. So I'm like 30 something years old. And my first time learning this.
That's great.
So my mom,
teaching kids in school.
People are like this. People are, so-and-so is that way. And that's the way that person is. You just have to work around that. So I don't know how she sees me, but I think she's just like, Josh is just that way. Mm-hmm. Other people aren't. Mm-hmm. And so she just has to work around that. Mm-hmm. And
I love you anyway.
And so I called her later on and I said, have you ever asked me to try to understand it? And she goes, will you try to change me? I'm like, there's a huge difference between me trying to change you. Mm-hmm. She didn't say those words, but it was like, we get into fights or something like that. I was like, Mom, everyone in the world wants to be understood. Nobody wants to be misunderstood. Right. I'm not trying to get you to do anything, but it would be nice for me to feel understood by my mom. Right. And she was like, well, understanding is, I give these tests and, now she's retired, but when she taught, she was like, we give these tests and you can't test understanding. I go, Mom, I'm not testing you, but if I speak to you in English or I speak to you in French, you can understand one of those more than the other, right? She's like, yeah. I go, I'm not looking to test you, but there's levels of understanding, even if you can't quantify it through some test. And she's like, well, it's not the same as agreeing. I'm like, you're right. It's not the same as agreeing.
That's not what we're talking about, Mom.
She was like, she didn't say the word ambush either, but she was like, you're just dumping this all on me. I'm like, I'm just saying, I'm commenting on what you said. Mm-hmm. I would like to be understood. And it's up to you if you want to ask me the questions for me to answer you.
See, I feel like your mom, this is like a microcosm in a very like high density. There's like so many variables. Like one, it's your mom. Two, it's like one of the only people who you said, the Spodek method doesn't work with. I don't know what the intersection, like if it were the Wallace method or whatever, would she be more open to, I don't know. Because because we can't. But I just.
And I want to mention, I'm not complaining here. I've not met the perfect parent.
Right.
So you get your issues with your parent. Pick your, whoever you are. I suppose, I don't know of anyone, maybe there are people who have just perfect relationships with their parents, but I don't expect that. There's love and support in all sorts of other areas.
Sure.
So I don't, this is
well,
mine.
Thanks for that. Love you, Mom.
And it could be,
of course.
I wonder about her growing up. Her father was an alcoholic and locked the kids in the basement sometimes. And so maybe she was just like, if someone's an alcoholic, you can't change that. But maybe I'm just projecting like one thing I know about her that I don't know.
Well, what are her cues of safety? What are her cues of danger? Like, that she's a whole system as well. I feel like there's this microcosm happening here of hearing things that aren't said. You're talking about understanding. She's talking about judging convincing. Or changing. Yeah, convincing. And it's an ambush. So it's like I can see her firing off. And I've had similar experiences, like when I tried to bring up talking about like race relations with the Rotary Club when I was part of Rotary, that's like notoriously male, pale, and stale. And the conversation did not go well. And I feel like most of the feedback was that like I was not presenting it well. I was calling them racist. And I would like comb through all the emails. I was like, did I even ever say racist? Like I really never did. I was like, this is happening in the world. We're supposed to be the leaders. We should probably talk about it. And it seems like, again, like when you hold a mirror up or even open the door to engage, this seems like a common response in sustainability, and why the Spodek method is like a really brilliant way to sort of come in the side door, like to sort of avoid all of those sort of reactions of like hearing things that haven't been said. I guess I just wonder, like, what can we do? I guess maybe the Spodek method is the answer, but what can we do to at least minimize? Because there's always going to be some level of people hearing things that aren't said, I think, or like blaming the messenger for like, you know, like you're talking about wanting to be understood and your mom is saying she feels ambushed. So
Mm,
like something isn't matching, right? And like
mm.
so especially in the sustainability conversation, yeah, the Spodek method is one, I think, roadmap, not just to match, but like to sort of, I don't know, take a shortcut even.
Well, there's a couple effects going on here. Now, to answer your question of how to do it, I don't know of any better method than the Spodek method, but that's in the short term. In the long
Hmm.
term, nothing beats community and culture and
Right,
role models that people look up to.
right.
So in the long run, the Spodek method is to kickstart, to get enough people to say, to realize through personal experience the myths of, if we're not going forward, we're going to fall back in the Stone Age, and if we're not progressful, pedal to the metal, then Mad Max apocalypse. That food that's sustainable tastes worse, costs more.
Mm,
So if we live in a culture that thinks sustainability is we're all going to die, 30 is going to be old age again,
right,
then personal experience is the only thing, and it has to be, and it can't be through bludgeoning, through CCCSC bludgeoning.
right.
So there's a lot of listening and making people feel understood and connecting with things that make them feel vulnerable.
Hmm.
But in the long run, once there's a new culture forming, that's going to sweep across much more effectively.
Sure.
Now,
Good
here's
answer.
something for people who want to work on sustainability. You are going to have the following happen all the time. Other people are living in their unsustainable. So say you're living more sustainably than someone, and you want to share, from your perspective, you've discovered this freedom that you didn't see before, and you want to share that. Okay.
Hmm.
But they're living in their culture that you were in too.
Hmm.
And if in their minds, they associate sustainability with guilt
Hmm.
and shame,
Consciously
or even not,
or unconsciously?
well, okay, let's say that they feel guilty about, let's say they have some knowledge that pollution is not healthy.
I feel like you say that, and yes, I understand. Like you've had 1,000 of these conversations, but like I was married to a person who still leaves all the lights on. There's like no, like there's no getting like he watched me start to live differently. He or like return to the things I wanted to do in the first place that I sort of tamped down when I was partnered with someone who didn't prioritize that. But like there's no thought. I can see there's no thought of like how much
or
garbage.
or there's thought that's suppressed and denied.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I guess there's conscious thought, but I don't. Yeah, okay.
Okay, let's go back to
I
the
acknowledge.
abusing children. A parent who is, let's say, someone who was abused as a child becomes an adult and they abuse a child, and for some reason their parents said to them, "It's because I love you," and so they have some connection between love and abuse.
Mhm.
They see their child crying. They hear other people saying, "It's don't abuse your children." They know there's a problem,
But to them, that's not abuse,
and
it's love.
yeah, and there's also they're keeping out everything to the contrary. So we all know about
Right.
confirmation
Confirmation
bias.
bias. Hmm.
Yeah. So there, if someone's been living for decades where progress is good and pollution is the
Exactly.
solution to pollution is dilution,
Yep.
and someone else will solve it, and
Yep.
all the things, the plane was
And
going to fly
their role
anyway,
models are polluting. Their role models just have
then
really clean houses.
yeah. So
Like,
if
what do they
you
want to do?
go to someone like that, so the following will happen. They will feel like, well, I was doing fine. You talked to me, and now I feel guilty.
Right.
You made me feel guilty, so
Right.
go away.
Right. See, throwing
Now,
shit at the mirror.
what happened was their conscience made them feel guilty. I can't make some, like when I lived in France and people would be like, "Oh, you're such an American." I was like, "Yep." They were trying to put me down, and didn't put me down.
Right.
There are problems with America. I'm happy to be an American,
Hmm.
and so I can't make someone feel guilty.
Sure.
If they're doing something that they don't think is bad, they're not going to feel guilty.
Right.
So that doesn't mean that doesn't mean go up to them and be like, "Hey, man, if you feel guilty, that's on you. I didn't do it. It's on you." That doesn't work either. I mean, it's not their responsibility for me to be understood. So I got to figure out what works. But everyone out there, just because you feel guilty when someone talks about sustainability doesn't mean that they're trying to make you feel guilty.
Right.
It may be that they are, I'm not sure, but many times they're not. I don't think, I don't know. I can't speak for anybody else, but I know lots of people, I'm just not even saying anything. And they're like, you're trying to make me feel guilty.
Or even like speaking, like I feel like I'll say an I sentence. Like, oh, I decided not to fly because I realized the damage I was doing. And it like spins into this story of don't tell me what to do. It's like
So the challenge here is to empathize with the other person. Here's the exercise is first I'll do a blunt one. When I see people litter, I'm walking down the street and I see someone throw litter on the ground. I have littered in the past when I was a kid, but I wouldn't litter now.
Sure.
But that person felt it was okay.
Right.
So given what's in my head and in my heart, that's not okay.
Right.
But for them it was. So that means I'm not empathizing with them. Empathizing with them would be get to a place in my head and my heart where that does make sense, where that's a good thing to do. And it's uncomfortable. So when I teach this type of exercise to my students at NYU in leadership class, I point out the most huge case, which is, I think of World War II, the generals that were fighting Hitler. If you want to beat Hitler, you got to think like him. You got to go to a place where you want to kill people for their religion, for all these things, and you want to take over the world, and you think Aryans are the best and so forth. You got to get to there. If you don't, you might lose. He might win. So that must have been very deeply uncomfortable for people to find that part. I mean, Hitler was human.
Correct.
He was born of human parents, and that meant that what's in him was in us.
Right.
And that means we can connect with that. Now, I'm not saying try to be like Hitler.
Right.
But some people did it. And what I'm saying is, if you want to understand why do people litter, if you don't care, if I want to influence them, I got to go to where they are.
Sure.
So that's where they are emotionally and intellectually.
Right.
So if someone always views any talk about sustainability or the environment as guilt, right? Why does that, you got to go to where that was, which is probably in your past as well. And that's this exercise of empathy. And it's not easy. It's not comfortable, but it's essential for effective leadership.
Essential.
It's also, that's part of the reason why I'm so into learning about indigenous cultures.
Sure.
And why I love that movie, The Great Dance, because it was like, they did it actually. When they're hunting animals, there are scenes where they're like hunting a kudu or whatever, some animal like a springbok or something that jumps around. And they're like following the tracks and like they're making these motions with their hands because they're not talking, because they're being quiet. And at some point they'll stop and they'll look around and they'll see, and then they'll say to the camera, here's what happened here. This animal came from here and that animal came from there and then this animal came from here. And you'll go, what?
Right.
But they're also like bouncing around to try to, like they're acting like the animal to figure out what the animal is going to do.
Sure. That's
what you do to catch an animal, is you be that animal. And I'm watching this, I'm thinking, one, that's kind of cool, like as a leadership exercise, it's like advanced for me. Okay. Now for them, it's like they started learning that at like 5 years old.
Right.
Is watching someone who speaks a language natively. Like I learned French as an adult, and a 5-year-old speaks better French than I ever will.
Right. Native speaking. Yeah.
I'm learning sustainability now. So someone who's immediate return hunter gatherer, they're gonna be more sustainable than I ever. They're gonna know more better than I ever will. In any case, in this situation, I'm also thinking, when we watch movies, we're being entertained and it takes us to another place. And it's kind of cool to see like a giant face. You can look it right in the eye, and they're not like, normally when you look someone in the eye, they like
vulnerable.
Yeah. But here you can look at something like 10 feet high and look them straight in the face. And you can see all the nuance of their facial expressions and so forth. And it lets you empathize more. We cry even though we know we're looking at a screen. I think that our ancestors had that all the time.
Well, how so? What do you mean?
Well, just from the hunting, they were going into another world.
Mm.
When we want literature, one of the
Sure.
roles of literature, I mean, it's usually with other people, this is with animals, but I suspect that they did it with people as well. That I think that they were, let's just stick with this hunting, that they were I think the experience of hunting was for them more than our experience of going to a play or an opera or to see drama or to see dance performance. I think well, I mean, our stuff can be, I think for them it was just automatic. They didn't have to pay to go to see it. They didn't have to,
Sure.
um, they, it, I, the emotions that we have when we go to see Beethoven's Ninth or KRS-One live, and it's taking us to another place. That's not we're not feeling emotions that our ancestors were not capable
Right.
of feeling. We can
Right.
only feel things that our ancestors had.
Right.
Our system is their system. We haven't evolved in this time.
Right.
So we are, I suspect that their emotional lives were probably at least as rich as ours, but probably more because they didn't have gatekeepers. They didn't have this dominance hierarchy that like you have to pay to go do this. They didn't, for us, anyone who thinks nature is something you have to fly to go see is getting less nature, not more.
Right.
Anyone who thinks that if they're not in touch with themselves, that their self-awareness is so low that they can't tell where the guilt is coming from, their self-awareness is really low.
That's
And
it though.
if
That's
you
like
read,
self-awareness.
Dawn of Everything talked about this guy Candy Ronk, who was we're talking the 1600s. The Europeans are colonizing the U.S., what's going to be the U.S. And there's this guy Candy Ronk, who's like a leader of the Wendat nation or tribe of Indians. This is where Montreal is now. And this guy was, among Native Americans, he was pretty well spoken. Among Europeans, he was like top. Because in the culture here, without the hierarchies, if I wanted you to do something, I would have to talk to you. I would have to lead you. I can't tell you what to do.
Oh, right.
In England and France and Spain at that time, it was pure hierarchy. Everyone knew from birth what their role was. And if someone above you told you to do something, you had to do it. And if you wanted someone below you to do something, they had to do it, or they would be punished. So Europeans didn't learn leadership. They didn't learn emotional intelligence. They didn't learn how to relate with like conflict resolution. The conflict resolution was you go to jail, off with his head. So this guy Candy Ronk was just one representative, but he's the one that they quote at length because people wrote about him. So he went to tour Europe, and all the intellectuals were like, "This guy's amazing." He was a regular guy, you know, a bit above the ranks of the typical Native American. It sounds like, but that culture produced people who were what we would call great leaders.
Right.
But that was just everyone. Everyone participated in democracy all the time, not by voting once every 4 years, but by figuring out what do we do in this situation.
Right. Well, and there was also a collective, I mean, there was a sense of collective well-being. Like, what's good? We're connected. There's like the underlying assumptions are we're in this together. How can we as a group thrive? Or what do we need as a group? It wasn't this like hyper individualism that is part of our culture.
You know, to me, the material conditions that cause it of a dominance hierarchy where there's a resource that could be controlled with no alternative. If the Native Americans lived with that, if fundamentally, if you can walk away, if I order you around, then a dominance hierarchy can't form. But that wasn't a situation in Europe, and that was a situation in North America. I mean, North America had lots of different situations. I don't want to say the whole continent, but generally there was less dominance hierarchy because what you needed to live was around. You couldn't force someone to do stuff. The alternative to doing what you're told was better, whereas in Europe it was worse.
Right.
And in Europe it was worse because in the Middle East it was worse. And the Middle East it was worse because that's where, when the Holocene happened, when the climate stabilized, not from climate change stuff, but just for some reason, more than 10,000 years ago, the climate was like really changing. And if you tried to
grow,
you could grow a plant and domesticate it, but within your lifetime, it would become not growable where you were.
Right.
So you couldn't form agriculture. It's not like people got smarter all of a sudden or figured something out that they couldn't solve before. For reasons unknown, the climate stabilized 10,000 years ago, and that led to agriculture being possible. And the place in the world that was most possible was the Middle East, although the Yellow River and Central America, there are lots of other places where it happened. But and so dominance hierarchies formed there as well.
Huh.
But Europe, it wasn't Europeans. They were the indigenous. There were people living sustainably in Europe when agriculture really kicked in the Fertile Crescent.
Sure.
But that's what created dominance hierarchy, and that culture spread because if you have a dominance hierarchy and you're at the top of it, if you're hurting people and then you let go, there's a reason there's witness protection programs when someone at the top of an organization turns against the organization. Your life is at risk. Mm-hmm. So you have to, because you're unsustainable, you have to expand. And because you're at the top of a dominance hierarchy, you have to do what it takes to maintain your hierarchy. So that's going to create empire. It's not evil people. It's not evil people create empires. Empires result from material conditions that force people to become evil. Or in the words of Ibram Kendi or Eric Williams, historians, racism didn't create slavery. Slavery created racism.
Right.
So we're at 90 minutes. We should probably wrap.
All right. Yeah. Good session.
This got serious, intense. Yeah.
Why wouldn't it? What else are we going to talk about? The weather?
Yeah,
we could
intense but happy. I mean, but smiley. I mean, I don't want to play fast and loose with like racism and slavery and colonialism and imperialism. But I want to identify what's going on. I mean, these are chapters in my book.
It's interesting too, just maybe this isn't, maybe like the tail end of this conversation isn't the place to bring it up, but as a graduate student at Howard University, like America's premier HBCU, it's fascinating to see this. Like our social work program is founded in what they call the Black perspective. It's like a central framework through which all of our classes are filtered. And it has, you know, six, it's not called tenets, but principles, including like diversity and internationalization and social justice and strength. Like a strength-based perspective is part of, at least in Howard's framework, the Black perspective. It's not like, yeah, I mean, as a white person at Howard, I feel like I have questions about it, but the idea is it's inclusive. It's not just applicable to Black people or Black practitioners. The idea is like, this is what the Black perspective is, use it. Who, you know, it's yours for the taking. I feel like the environmental justice component of social work and of like most of our conversations in what tends to be a racial justice conversation is always sort of treated as like, oh, well, I don't think we have time for that. It's like sort of dismissed. And what I would love to talk at some point about is how environmental justice or like sustainability is integral. I think I've been mispronouncing that word my whole life, but is a fundamental like foundation from which racial justice springs.
Yes, let's make that the next time.
Great.
But I do want to, I have to bring up something from last time that about Spodek method and about leadership. I'm going to put you on the spot. So if people are watching this, it meant that that Evelyn was large-hearted enough that she allowed this to go on. So I was talking last time about big things. You have to go to where they are. When I think I'd talked about the Trump guy in a small town and how when he said he was going to recycle plastic, did I say to him, well, actually recycling plastic doesn't really work that well? No, that's not where he was.
Right.
That's why intercept talk, that wouldn't help his slope.
Right.
Now, shortly thereafter in that conversation, I was talking about slaves and maybe owners.
Oh, yeah.
And you said, actually, the term is enslaved person, perhaps, or I forget how you put it.
Well, and this is not like I don't know a discipline that's also fighting this fight, but personally, I feel like it's wrong It's a wrong terminology. It's incorrect. A human person can't be a slave. They can be treated, they can be trafficked,
Hmm.
but calling someone a slave or a slave owner, like you're a human trafficker, buddy. That's You're a human rights violator. Your framework doesn't get to dictate how we identify. Not we, I was not enslaved, but like how human people identify. But I don't know a lot of other people who have a problem with the terminology the way I do. So
Now, I may have been right in all my knowledge of plastic pollution, plastic recycling not being effective and so forth. Let's say I was 100% right.
sure.
Do you see how what you were saying to me was me saying to him, plastic pollution, plastic recycling doesn't actually work?
How me saying the term slave
Yeah. Were you
is,
saying that for me or for you? Were you going to where I was, or were you where you were?
well, I was talking to you more as like a friend, like trying to teach you something that was important to me. I wasn't like trying to, yeah, I mean, sure, I can see how. I guess I don't know if that's something that is important to me to like communicate or share. I guess I'll have to figure out how and when and where to do it.
Yeah. It's not that I'm never going to talk to him about plastic recycling.
Mhm.
I'm not going to do it when he's on a roll. When he's in a
Sure.
space, when his slope is, zzz, I'm not going to be
Mm.
like that. So if you look at the tone of what happened when we were speaking, suddenly I'm just like, "Ugh, how do I deal with this? What? It's a sensitive topic. It's important, but suddenly it was all about you. And now I'm not saying it in regular conversation, going back and forth. That's normal, but it was an example of like, oh, what? All right, lecture me. Give me all right, tell me the lecture. Or I have to be as I was. I was like, well, it was really like, if that was in the middle of the Spodek method, it's going to be tough to lead that person. Now it wasn't, but it's not a matter of being right. It's a matter of being effective.
Heard, chef.
So I'm. It may be that saying master and slave is all wrong, even by my own standards. That time and place was ineffective. It was effective. It felt to me like it was here, not where I was.
Got it. Thanks for the feedback.
I'm trying to read your expression. I know you pretty well, but I'm not reading hurt, annoyed, or
We don't have to like dive into
okay.
my emotions. Sorry, there's stuff about to happen in my life. We should probably sign off.
Okay. And so I haven't finished the story about the Drew Gardens, but yeah, we're way over. I don't know, we're way over, but people who are listening are really into it.
Yeah, right. You've made it this far. Stick with us. Just wait till we're live. You
Yeah,
can jump in
that'll be great.
and tell me how slave terminology is a-okay.
Oh yeah, we'll put that on the
Timing.
agenda too.
Timing. Got it. Growth edge.
Okay.
All right.
Anything else to close with? No, we'll just close there and we'll start again later.
All right. Good to see you,
Bye,
Josh.
everyone. Oh wait, we